This deals with a very open-ended question. This theme, humanities exploration, the turning of the wheel, this is an exploration into the relationship between, on the one hand, the unique and universal, but that's just a launching point. That's a beginning point. And I think it really deals with fundamental questions of our capacity for communication, for collaboration, for creativity, and community. We're exploring the humanities and using humanities as one of those approaches because it asks the big questions. It's not that other disciplines don't ask the big questions, they do, but humanities really tries to go at those questions in a very broad sweep and talk about the implications of that. When you read, like with the Idaho Humanities Council's definition of the humanities, it talks about the unique role of humanities bringing forth wisdom. So people take moral judgments, reflective judgments, and apply them to our democracy. Apply the big questions to our lives. So it really sets up a context for this in a very important way so that we can look at, for example, closer to home, our own diversity and how we're dealing with differences here on campus amongst our students, amongst our faculty, how we as a university are interacting with our communities around us.
All of the people who make up the community of Moscow are critically important as spokes to the function of local government. We can view the wheel at multiple scales, and so if we look at the hub as being the community, we look at the spokes as being all the people and agencies that contribute to its function. We look at the rim as the whole of our nation and our planet, kind of influencing how we behave, how we function, and then in the same token, we are also connected to that greater whole by virtue of the various spokes that interact with each other. I think that the tree of life is another concept. As I pulled this pin out of my jewelry box this morning, I was thinking about the rootedness of our being, the people who preceded us, who laid the groundwork for where we are today, and then the proliferation of foliage, the growth that we experience, and the beauty that can be created by people working together for the health of the whole.
So the metaphor I thought of that I really liked was actually it was one of the fragments of Heraclitus, pre-Socratic philosopher, who, I can't remember the exact wording of it, but he said, you know, consider the bow in a bow and arrow. The tension goes both ways. It's in a tense, ready-to-go system, but it's stable and not moving. And the more I think about the bow, the more I like it, because once you release the arrow, there's nothing you can do. So once you've done an activity, once you finished a project, you're not going to get that arrow back, so don't worry about it. You know, and you can't just stand there forever holding the bow, because nothing ever happens except the bow starts to fall apart and your arm gets tired. So I like the bow and arrow metaphor.
I think metaphors are necessary for thinking about the complexity of our human experience. Without metaphors, it can be quite confusing.
The idea that, especially as I get older, rocking chairs are very satisfying to me. And I like the idea that in a rocking chair you have motion and stability at the same time. The idea that you are in one place, but yet you can continually move. And for me, that is a very satisfying feeling. And I see community like that in a way as well. The idea that when you look at history and cultures, oftentimes there's a stability that helps keep the culture intact. Things don't change because they work. But at the same time, within that stability, there is a motion. Not necessarily a back and forth like a rocking chair, but a motion that goes and is synchronized with the stability. So oftentimes I think of rocking chairs as a good metaphor for those types of ideals.
I think specific actually to my talk and the kind of research I do, and kind of related to some of the other things that we're talking about in this colloquium, this juxtaposition of you know, the kind of the universality and the specific, is also this notion that was common to scientists and philosophers throughout European history, this notion of the microcosm and macrocosm, and that, and you might have also heard it said as above, so below, and this notion that everything is linked. The small is linked to the large, and you can see microcosms of the universe in cellular structures and so forth. And I think that notion that interconnectivity that we and everything else has throughout to each other and to the rest of the universe, I think is very helpful to remember that nothing is isolated. Nothing is an isolated incident.
Well, I think it has a lot of meaning, but different meaning to a lot of us. So when we think about a full circle, first and foremost, we have a full circle, how we're all connected, how these issues I guess I would call it different themes of diversity, are interconnected and interconnected to everything. I tend to actually think more in terms of a tapestry and all the threads of the tapestry that make the whole. But to make progress, to add to the body of knowledge, to add to the body of experience, to add to the body of narratives, to add to the body of effort towards progressive social change, that is a wheel. That's a progressive image to turn. And then, of course, the spokes to me are the component pieces. I think as well that there is probably not just one spinning wheel. We have many spinning wheels, and can we bring them into alignment, much like the gears of machinery, to make something happen?
Well, the central theme of the wagon wheel and the turning of the wheel, the relationship between the spokes and the hub, between the unique and the universal, has lots of different applications for all of us. Certainly I'm taking it a certain way and presenting it as a keynote address, and it's sort of oriented my overall approach to this humanities exploration. These 34 events occurring throughout the fall and spring of 2011 and 12. But as I've presented that theme, that question to various faculty, they've all responded in a very unique way. When I went to, for example, Dan Buckfitch in music, he's been working very closely with Naveen Shetty and putting together a great synthesis of music that part of it's predicated on sensibilities coming out of Nepal and North India, but also sensibilities coming out of Catholic hymns, combining this into a jazz piece of music, taking various spokes, distinct spokes, and recombining them in a creative way to create something new out of that. And one of the interesting things I think this spoke and hub have to do is also with not only how we best communicate with each other or collaborate, but also how do we create? Where does creativity usher from? How does it come about? How does it come about in the sciences, in the arts?
Let me go back a little bit and just talk a little about how this actually came into existence. The first time I was here in school, when I met Dan, and then I got into jazz choir, and he was talking about for me to write something that would have some Indian classical influence in some kind of music. It wasn't nothing to do with the choir or either the mass as such, but I think it was Dan's idea. One day he told me, like, you know what, maybe you could write something, that's a mass, because he's done so many masses that have like African influence and Cuban influence, music from all around the world. So that's how the idea came up. And I didn't go to a Catholic school, but actually I did. I started in an elementary school that was a Catholic school, so I had a little bit of background on, mass and singing hymns. And then I went to a Protestant school in Darjeeling, India, northeast part of India. Long story, but I did have some kind of a background about mass and hymns. And so when he talked about Indian influence on a mass, as we started with Gloria, and then once Gloria came into play, we tried it out with the choir, and it was a lot of fun, and then inspired me to write not the whole mass, but the Kyrie and Sanctus part of it. So basically, this is Kyrie, Sanctus, and Gloria influenced by Indian classical music, and I'm sure you'll hear it. It's got a little bit of Hindu influence in it too, because we start off with Om, basically is a primary form of chant in Hinduism that tries to unite people or unite universes, or like the whole syllables about O, U, Ma, trying to put a universal aspect to it, you know. When we talk about like the three aspects, the trilogy in Hinduism is huge. So heaven, earth, and hell actually, you know, kind of mixed together, and various ways of putting the Om aspect as a universal thing. And later on, there's another mantra that comes in, talks about peace and compassion. So here is the Mass.
And heaven and earth and hell are actually mixed in tonight.
Yeah, why not?
Now that I think about it. And one more thing, though. There is solfege in every country, and we have some of your solfege in this.
Yes.
You know, the do, re, mi, fa stuff.
So similar way of teaching, where we have do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. We have in Indian classical music called sa, re, ga, ma, pa, dha, ni, sa. And if you look at the syllables, re, the hopeful tone is pretty much the same. So sa, re, do, re. So certain similarities. And we've used a little bit of solfege singing with the choir, because that's a big part of improvisation in Indian classical music, where they use the syllables of the solfege to improvise. So we've used a little bit of that, and we've also used a little bit of rhythmic singing, because on the tabla drums, before we actually play the instrument and play the rhythm, we are asked to sing, and we kind of try to imitate the sound, both ways, I guess, of the voice on the drums or the sound of the drums with the voice. So again,
Would you do that
sure.
just for a second?
So dha, dha, tere, kete, dha, dha, tun, na. So that would be the syllables I could play on the drums. And so before I would play it, the teacher would be like, play your dha. So it's each syllables, you know. And so dha, dha, tere, kete, dha, dha, tun, na. So it would be something like this on the drums. Dha, dha, tere, kete, dha, dha, tun, na, dha, dha, tere, kete, dha, dha, tun, na. Da da tergate da da tunna ta ta tergate da da dinna. Da tergate da tergate da tergate da. Da tergate da tergate da tergate da tergate da tergate da.
Okay, everybody.
Satoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotigamaya Mrityuma Amritam Gamaya Loka Samasta Sukhina Bhavantu Loka Samasta Sukhina Bhavantu Loka Samasta Sukhina Bhavantu.
Hosanna, Hosanna.
Sally Macklis and Delphine Keem are involved with a collaboration this summer, creating art around this theme, for example.
Should I try one more?
Yeah, let's run it one more time.
Okay.
But it's going to be unique how they deal with this through the arts and graphic design.
Often people are starting to work together a lot more, and artists are interested in tackling important problems and important issues. And so we do need to, if one of our issues is about something dear to us environmentally, we might need to get together with an environmental scientist and do some research to inform our work. So I do think artists are working way more collaborative, yes. Sometimes we do take all that research and go back to our studio and work alone. And so we've worked so much more together day in and day out on this project. But yes, I do think there's a lot of change in fine art and in design.
Absolutely, in design. Collaboration is becoming more the norm. And I think our college is kind of responding to that with its integration of programmatic integration, where we still have individual programs, but we're trying to cross boundaries a lot more. And I think it's in response to an increasingly complex world that has complex problems to solve. You need multiple disciplines, multiple skill sets to be able to approach those problems and solve them. And even witnessed in the classroom, when we have a person who is stuck, they have a direction and they need to figure out a way to reconcile what they're trying to do with the problem at hand. You put a few minds on that one particular problem and it gets solved so much more quickly than if you try to solve it alone. So I think people are recognizing the value of collaboration in design, absolutely.
Brandon Schran, a creative writer, an essayist, will be taking this theme to his graduate students this fall and asking them to write on this theme as it speaks to creative writing.
I think it was really clear to them that the essay was a model of working in the unique and the universal. So I'm just going to introduce each of the graduate students here, a little bit of what they're working on. That's probably for me, so it could be awkward if I get hauled out of here. We're going to start first with, I'll introduce the students. They'll read for about 15 minutes each, and then afterwards I'll pose maybe one, maybe two questions and turn it over to you guys, and you can ask them about their process of writing, about the essay as a form, about what it means to write in the unique and the universal, and we'll just sort of roll with the conversation that way.
It's sort of a political essay and also kind of dealing with, and I'm not a political person, so and it's sort of dealing with bringing in different artifacts or things that I'm reading at the time. So this is called On Indignation. My mother last February sent me a single frame cartoon cut out from the Grand Rapids Press. The sketch is of a mother holding the hand of her young daughter who is wearing a bucket upside down on her head. The caption reads, "She has her father's politics." The point of the joke is that mothers always blame their children's shortcomings on their fathers, but this cartoon statement about my political preference is pretty apt, which is to say that I have my head in the sand, which is to say that my mother thinks I'm apolitical, which is to say she's probably right. But recently, I've been dabbling in Gerald R. Ford's autobiography, A Time to Heal. I feel neglecting to look at the life of my hometown hero at this particular crossroads during this hot-headed political climate would be remiss. It's a memoir of amnesty, of doling out forgiveness. He is frank and methodical in detailing his life. He uses a calm and collected rhetoric, the vernacular of a politician who has nothing to hide. He pardoned Nixon, forgave the Vietnam draft dodgers who ran away to Canada, even excused pregnant women who chose to abort their babies they had no intention of bringing into this world. And he's supposed to be a Republican. Tell that to Sarah Palin and the creative forces who, not so long ago, conceived of the Take Back the 20 website. This is what we've stooped to, a US map with the icon of a gun scope centered on the locations of the 20 Democrats who voted for Obama's health care bill in formerly Republican-leaning districts. A self-fulfilling prophecy. 2 years ago, I lived in a home sheltering 3 generations. My mother, the epicenter of all of us, ruled the decisions in that house. I woke to her TV in the kitchen blaring the Today Show. Then, after Mom left for work, Grandpa dozed to CNBC's stock market ticker, keeping me updated. Coca-Cola's up 3 1/4, whatever that means. At 4, on days my mother and I skipped work or came home early, we drank Pinot Grigio and watched the Ellen DeGeneres Show, a show my mother loves, says Ellen should win Woman of the Year even if she's gay. Then Jeopardy for Grandma and for Dad, and Wheel of Fortune while my mom made dinner. And after too many nights of the O'Reilly Factor, my mother said enough is enough, banished Grandpa and Grandma to the TV in the attic to watch that trash so she could watch HGTV's Property Virgins. Ford never wanted to be president. He hated a spectacle, believed Nixon was telling him the truth until the tapes were transcribed and Nixon was caught, smoking gun in hand. Humility and integrity synonymous with Ford's presidency, and inevitably, through no fault of his own, the picking up the pieces of a country deceived. Ford and I, our childhoods are essentially the same, carbon copies of all the best opportunities, parents who knew how to balance discipline and compassion. The Grand Rapids that Ford grew up in was a straight-laced city built on the promise of the Grand River and the automobile. The 60 years that transpired between his childhood and mine did little in the ways of turning this Midwestern city into a progressive, diverse, all-inclusive melting pot of open-minded individuals. Grand Rapids votes Republican. But as is true with all good children of strict parenting, there is inevitably rebellion, that irrevocable rift between parent and child when both learn for the first time that they are autonomous beings. Ford's mutiny was in middle school, playing poker in his father's shed, betting pennies. And when his stepfather caught them red-handed, they were severely reprimanded. Mine was in 3rd grade, a silent uprising against my mother's limitless authority. I learned her values quickly, the consequences of withholding the truth. That impactful night when my mother shook me awake long after my bedtime, emptied my backpack onto the kitchen counter, asked why I hadn't been spending my milk money. I saw splayed before me on that pink formica the baggie of all those nickels and dimes, the coins spread to cover the largest surface area possible, weighted down by the gravity of being found out. I said that the milk at school was warm and the lunch lady would make me drink it all because it makes the trash bags heavy, and all that unwanted milk would cause the bags to tear, would drip and spill across the gymnasium's floor when she hauled them out to the dumpster. And that accumulation of daily lies, that pit of dread, accepting the week's envelope of change, 5 days of milk money I'd never spend, that would turn into a month's worth and then into 2 months' worth, and maybe at age 8, I started to doubt that child's certainty that parents are omniscient. In college, I would stand behind that full-length mirror on the back of my dorm room door and look at the truth of my being for the first time. Lurking behind my skin, behind all the tangible flesh and cells, the part of me that moves without muscles, without neurons firing, flinched in recognition at the truth of her lips on my neck and the sheet stuffed between the bed and the wall. And maybe this had always been lying dormant, but all these years of overlooking it made me feel fickle, out of touch with what was real inside, made me feel like a stranger to myself, ashamed, not in the bodily act of her flesh on my flesh, but in the lie. Maybe I learned more about my ability to disappoint that night, standing barefoot on the kitchen linoleum, than the gravity of keeping secrets. How that lie that began as a silence felt so small, so insignificant at first, and how, after that first untruth, how all the other untruths came easier, like an inevitable, unstoppable train. Deceit ratcheted taut. I learned to pat my head and rub my belly simultaneously, to never let my left hand know what my right was doing, to hide even the most basic truths of my identity from myself. Perhaps this kind of realization was always there in my subconscious, a truth I have always known, like a myclonic jerk on the raft that is my childhood bed, barely asleep and falling over the edge. Jared Lee Lochner once asked Representative Giffords, "How do you know words mean anything?" Politicians should spend some time studying Saussure. The signifier refers directly to the signified. Maybe then they might know better than to fight violence with violence. Maybe then they would know the whole slew of baggage they are calling upon when they throw around words like blood libel. Ford donated blood to pay his way through college, but today this kind of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is scoffed at. The ideal of the American dream turned into some sick joke. I tried for 2 years to get a career track job after college, one with benefits, so my mother would quit harping on me to figure my shit out. Emerson said something about self-reliance once. We live in the age of the first-person singular. I played duck hunt as a child, let the computer simulator position me behind the scope, zoom in on my target, all the challenge and skill reduced to the mind-numbing centering of the crosshair on a bird. But I'm not from Alaska and I don't own a gun. Some things are funny until they manifest into reality. Perhaps Ford's character and merit as a political leader can best be described as he explains his own ambidexterity. For as long as I can remember, I have been left-handed when I've been sitting down and right-handed when I'm standing up. I'd throw a football with my right hand and write with my left. And maybe this kind of ambiguity is noble, is endearing, is having two dichotomies existent in the self simultaneously. He was an Eagle Scout, you know, always prepared, unconditionally trustworthy, loyal, helpful, courteous, etc., lived a morally straight life and then transcribed that life into a widely popular book, printed and bound and read cover to cover in one sitting by my grandfather. My memories, unlike Ford's, will not be bookended by Bible verses. I might as well have been born in California with Richard Nixon, with how far I've strayed from the values calcified behind plexiglass cases in the Gerald R. Ford Presidential Library and Museum, 3 blocks from where my mother still lives, alone now in that house that once held 5 adults and 2 dogs. They call the 2000s the knots, which means zero, but also means lost, ruined, worthless, morally corrupt, like we are living in some sort of black hole, an empty set, a vast wasteland barren of meaning. And maybe caring about all this was for naught, because how do I know words mean anything? Because so many words have been broadcast on the Today Show, on CSNBC, on CNN and Fox, about the recession and healthcare reform and gay rights, and now Occupy Wall Street, and people still hate, and people still die. I watched Ford's funeral on the cable TV at work, heard the low-flying Air Force jet usher his body into Grand Rapids, sat bumper to bumper in the traffic jam that ensued, but I was struck by something like indifference. One critic of the leftist political rhetoric says liberals are pointing the finger at the Tea Partiers, saying that the Tucson shooting was the product of all the loaded language flying around these days, that it wasn't just one man who held the gun. But Lochner was mentally ill, was apolitical. The critic argues that those who knew him have committed the greatest crime, that perhaps Lochner should never have had the opportunity to buy a gun. But hindsight is not the same thing as a social critique that necessitates change, mandates toning down our language. Maybe I like the sentiment of the Boston Tea Party, civilians enacting their last fleeting strands of autonomy and the adrenaline rush of dumping all that tea into the harbor, teaking the ocean brown. But when the critic likens the leftist call for cooling the political fury to don't ask, don't tell, perhaps because both instances require a silence, beg us to bite our tongues, I want to stand on a chair and shout something vengeful. What if we ask ourselves where anger comes from, where hate comes from? Will we look in the mirror and see Lochner's bald head, lopsided grin? And who ever decided privacy was a good thing? If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Don't look Lochner in the eye now and tell me he scares you. Lochner tried to buy extra bullets at Walmart the morning of January 8th. The sales associate was afraid of him, his otherness, his bald head, his shabby clothes. So much so she hid out in the back room for several minutes before returning with the lie, "We're out of stock." And I wonder how many lives that lie saved. And when I look in the mirror now, all I see is deceit. I am standing in that parking lot on the asphalt in Arizona in January. And I want to say being apolitical has made me numb to all of this, but it hasn't. There is a 76-year-old retired construction worker who shares the same last name as me, but to whom I am not related, who died in that Safeway parking lot because of misplaced anger. And Christina Taylor Greene, 9 years old, do we dare speak the names of the dead? Born on the day of the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, born into a world of burning buildings, burning tempers, burning words. I came out to my mother during a blizzard on a Wednesday, in a month that has more hours of darkness than daylight. I sent those words, "Mom, I'm gay," in an email past my bedtime, well aware of the 3-hour time change between where I live now in the Pacific time zone and Michigan Eastern Standard Time. That she wouldn't get the news till morning. She says in an email reply the next day that she has lots of friends who are gay, meaning she has a gay hairdresser, and that as a mother, she just wants me to be happy, that she knows it's hard for people who are gay. Says the hardest thing for her is the deceit. For 4 years, I knew and never said anything, slept under the heavy down comforters of other women's beds, and the weight of that lie felt infinite against my naked body. In 2001, more than 20 years after publishing his autobiography, Ford broke with the conservative tradition, telling a Detroit journalist that gay and lesbian couples ought to be treated equally, period. Even now, 5 years after his death, he is still the highest-ranking Republican to ever publicly embrace full equality for gays and lesbians. And I feel a wash of relief in having his approval, like maybe his forgiveness is also Grand Rapids' forgiveness, is also merit for me to forgive myself, and maybe people are allowed to change their minds.
Rob Casely is directing this wonderful play, The Adoration of Dora, this fall, with Lojo Simon, MFA student here at the university, wrote this incredible play. And it just so happens that one of its critical central themes in this play speaks directly to our humanities exploration.
The definite theme is that sort of war we all have within ourselves of that we call it the critic around here when we have that side of ourselves. It's always nagging and saying, this is what you're doing wrong, you're not good enough, here's all these reasons why you shouldn't be happy with who you are. And I like, there's much more to Mar than that, but that's how I think as an actor I can relate to your character, is that it's that times 1,000. That little voice just becomes this all-encompassing force, and it's fed by what Picasso has done to this woman.
I think that that's significant in any time period. Losing yourself for a lover, for a family member, for anybody, just that. I think just the war of that piece of yourself that's fighting for you, because ultimately you are your own best advocate. You are going to be the one who's going to save you from like that cliff. And so I really think that loss and, just the personal war of between yourself and at the end of the day, all you really have left is yourself.
Luckily, we have such an amazing group here at the U of I Theater, and everyone is so dedicated to telling these stories in whatever way they contribute, whether it's, this costume will move along the piece to, the stage manager goes, okay, here's, what you need to know to make sure the rehearsals run smoothly. Everyone is so dedicated, and especially in a piece like this where we all have so much invested in it, especially with it being a student-written work. We all are involved in this creative process together, sort of discovering it as we go. It's not a show you can fall back on and be like, oh, okay, well, this is how they've done it before. We're creating this as we go along, and every single person has brought something different to it.
I think that University of Idaho is incredibly special because of the breadth of its dramatic writing program, and that people like Lo actually are just these phenomenal writers get to come here and learn from people like Rob, and he just nurtures them and develops them so much that they can make this amazing work. And then, in return, the universities and Turning of the Wheel, the Humanities, support putting that work on stage. And I think that our theater department, and I know that this is a lot for a lot of the bigger ones, that they have a mixture of undergrad BFAs and MFAs that are able to perform together. And I think that we all teach each other just these amazing things as far as doing the show, and then you've got this amazing work, and obviously just like Lindsay said with the stage manager and the director and everybody, how amazing they are. It really would not work, but it really started off with the playwriting program, and that she was able to develop this piece.
Writing a play about Dora Maar was a great joy for me, because there is a wealth of creativity embedded in the story of women and surrealism. Honoring Dora Maar is a way of sharing stories of under-recognized and thus undervalued women in this period of rich artistic and political history. In a very practical sense, it also is a way to shift the gender imbalance in theater history. Women's stories are underrepresented in the theatrical canon, and frequently both historic and contemporary plays offer few really meaty acting opportunities for women. Dora Maar and her surrealist colleagues explored their world through poetry, painting, photography, and political action in the response to the rise of fascism. Knowing this, I had a wealth of raw material upon which to build Adoration of Dora, a play that is not only one of words and actions, but also one of images and ideas. Sometimes the images in Dora complement the text and action. Sometimes they serve as a counterpoint. The play is thus art about art, a representation of a photographer who made images of a painter who painted images of a photographer. All of these multiple layers translated into words and images for the stage. Surrealism provides an interesting framework upon which to build a piece of theater. A derivative of Freud's identification of the conscious and the unconscious, at its core is the notion that we can more fully realize ourselves by bridging the gap between head knowledge and heart knowledge, consciousness and unconsciousness, dreams and waking. Surrealism provides incredible freedom for a playwright. Dora moves fluidly from consciousness to imagination, from reality to dream states. Dora's friends become enemies, paintings come alive, two-dimensional art becomes three-dimensional art, and the simple exchange of hats turns whores into dictators. There is no rational explanation for these twists and turns in the play. Our irrational minds must make the connections. In the play, Dora Maar is also played by two actors. The physical manifestation of a fractured self. The outer self we portray to the world, the physical being, and the inner voice, the subconscious, the invisible made visible on stage. How fortunate that the word mar means blemish or disfigurement, a perfect metaphor for our inner voices that, like a blemish, we often want to hide. In Spanish, mar is the word for the ocean, the sea, the water that lies underneath the land. This mar also seemed a fitting name for Dora's self beneath the self. So the play began to take shape with multiple layers and themes. The untold story of women artists, the imagery and evocativeness of surrealism, artistic competition, the dominance of a younger woman by an older man, jealousy between lovers, the turmoil of the interwar period, the turmoil of love, photography versus painting, the distortion of beauty, and the battle against fascism. Not surprisingly, then, the play offers a lot to absorb in one sitting. Some theatergoers are uncomfortable. They're disturbed by the non-linear, non-rational presentation of Dora Maar. Others are fascinated and come back more than once to sift through the multiple layers and themes. The humanities exploration provides a similar challenge as we explore the interplay of the unique and the universal through multiple perspectives. Dora's story is indeed unique, but it is also a microcosm for the universal struggle we all face in maintaining our individual and creative selves in the context of relationships. How do I honor who I really am, even when I am with another? How do I stand alone within a relationship? How do I honor my own creative process and still find time for family and friends and laundry? Or as Maar says to Dora, who are you when you are not his reflection of you? Wrestling with this challenge is essential to the creative process, not only for artists, but for everyone who creates in his or her area of expertise. How do we preserve our unique voices, our creativity when we live and work with others? How does the architect or writer or educator honor and express his or her personal vision when everyone around is swimming one direction and her inner voice tells her to go another? How does the son whose father, grandfather, and great-grandfather have invested themselves in, say, agriculture, and the son yearns to leave the farm to become a dancer? How does the woman who is a wife and mother honor and respect these roles, but still wear the hat of painter or poet. Writers write what we most need to hear. For me, Dora explores a unique yet universal story about the creative process from a woman's point of view. Now, in production, as opposed to on the page, the exploration becomes a collaboration, a unique and universal interplay with 6 other women, the incredible actors who brought Dora Maar and her artistic colleagues to life. The collaboration process among playwright, actors, directors, and designers adds yet another layer to the creative process. To use the wheel metaphor, the text is the hub, and the dozens of people involved in staging Dora are the spokes that connect the text to the audience who form the wheel's rim.
The interplay of what's unique and multiple and diverse on one hand, and what is universal or what we share in common, that interplay is, it manifests it so often in how we interact with each other here in the university community, with our students and with our faculty. In my field of anthropology, ethnography, we really emphasize, for example, the importance of respecting and understanding, of celebrating and critiquing our differences. We have courses written about world cultures dealing with the differences. So that's important. We need to understand each other's unique paths, their unique histories, traditions, their languages, if we want to communicate and collaborate with people. It's important in our business community, our natural resources, our education, and certainly as students in the humanities and social sciences, we want to be able to be well versed there. And so we emphasize that all the time. We have an Office of Diversity, and we have and Human Rights. We have programs in respecting diversity, and that is so critical and so important because of all of the equality of our spokes. We want to recognize that. But what is less emphasized, I think, on our campus is the importance of what we also share in common.